A fox knows many things, but a hedgehog knows one important thing. It's one important thing. It's one important thing.
Welcome to the Academic Hedgehog Podcast, where we talk about teaching and learning and the incredible work that you do in the classroom. Here's your host, Ira Gardner.
Well, thank you for joining us today. And to begin with, I'm going to ask the easiest question, but just to make sure we get it accurately, would you tell me your name and what you teach?
My name is Craig Rickett. I teach public speaking and argumentation and advocacy.
If you had to narrow it down to one thing, one idea, one key learning outcome, what is the one thing that you would like your students to learn from you?
The power of self-expression. I suppose advocacy and self-advocacy as we experience it through self-expression. I think just as we move into college, I think many people experience that sort of blossoming effect. And part of that blossoming is being able to express yourself, to articulate your ideas, and if necessary, to defend a position. So that's pretty much the main takeaway for me.
How do you do that?
Mostly by creating a safe space where students can experiment with self-expression. They're going to get some things wrong. They always do. But by allowing them the opportunity, I suppose, to develop their ideas and to prepare them, and then actually to express them out to an audience of peers, I think it gives them, a little added confidence that maybe what they have to say and maybe what they think is meaningful and worthwhile. So, creating a safe space is the first thing I try to do in class.
What does it look like? How do you get that process started?
First day of class, I completely forego syllabi and get students talking to each other. So in my public speaking class, I have students actually getting to know members of their audience. And so it is kind of an icebreaker, but it takes the entire class period. So a student will introduce himself to a classmate, and then that classmate will introduce that student to about half the class in a small group thing. But it kind of mimics a public speaking setting a little bit. Oftentimes students are standing up and presenting their introduction partner in the first day of public speaking. And so that creates that sense of community. After the first day of class, a student has learned the names and something about 10 people, 12 people in their class. So they immediately feel like they belong. They're not a stranger there. And I continue to sort of remind students of other classmates' name, in the sense that on day 2 and day 3, I will ask random people in the class, can you name the people that you got to know on the first day? It's remarkable. Many of them do, and then can continue developing that relationship over the course of the quarter. And then I also, when I talk about audience analysis, which is beginning of the second week of class, I really encourage students. Well, here's kind of the context. By the second week of class, everybody has already become very territorial. They sit in their seats. They don't move. They don't interact with anybody other than the 3 or 4 people around them. And so when we get to the part on audience analysis, I encourage everybody to sort of change it up a little bit. I don't require it, but I encourage it. So asking them, tomorrow when you come to class, why don't you choose a different place to sit? Why don't you, walk across the room and get to know some people on the other side? Because these are your audience members, and you will want to know as much about them as you can, just to get comfortable speaking in front of them. So that's in the public speaking. In argumentation and advocacy, again, first day of class, we don't do the syllabus. We have a mini debate, a little, really controlled environment, where I ask people to tackle a particular topic. Lately, we've been talking about the perceived benefits of having community college be tuition free. So that's been kind of a good ice-breaking debate to use. So those two seem to be working pretty well for me in terms of creating a safe space and a place where students feel like they can express themselves.
Well, so what's interesting about this, I want to follow up with this, is how do you facilitate that without being perceived as the power broker in the room? What do you do that creates this this quality in the classroom where people are willing to be open with you?
Well, first, in public speaking, they're not being open with me; they're being open with their classmates. I'm not a part of the introduction exercise in public speaking. I give the directions and then get out of the way and let them go. I keep the activity moving forward, but the activity is not centered on me. It's this is your opportunity to introduce yourself to members of your audience. Let's take advantage of it. And
so one way you're doing that is by stepping to the side and getting them to engage with each other as opposed to all eyes on you.
Correct. Yeah. And in the argumentation and advocacy, I post the topic and, set up the format. So it'll be 4 people at a table, and I'll say, okay, on this side of the table, you are going to be negative. You're going to argue the negative, and on this side of the table, you're going to argue the affirmative. And I don't really give them, the choice. Do you agree or not agree with the resolution? Because one of the things that I try to emphasize in advocacy is that you, as a public advocate, you don't always get to choose the side that you're on, but you still have the ethical burden of presenting the best arguments you can for the side that you've been assigned to. So, and they kind of get used to that pretty early on. And the speeches aren't long. They're 2 minutes. They're sitting down. It's just to the other 3 people there at the table. But it gives them an opportunity together to experience what it is like to be in conflict, to be exchanging arguments with people that you may or may not know while still remaining civil.
That seems important today, doesn't it?
Oh, Ira, that's opening up a whole new topic. But yes, absolutely. Civility is the rule in the classroom itself. And I after this many years, I haven't had a situation where it's gotten out of hand. So,
well, and I imagine you're exploring and helping them explore this idea of discursive formation of cultural meaning.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
And so there's a service being provided by being able to argue both sides of an issue or many sides of an issue.
Right. Right. And we'll come back to that first day's activity throughout the rest of that first week, and we'll look at, we'll get down to the micro level of what does free college actually mean? Let's look at it from the standpoint of definition, and then let's look at it from the standpoint of what do we as a culture associate with the word free? How much value do we place on it? What do we think as a culture when we get something for free? And it leads to some interesting discussions, but then that also helps them shape their thinking down the line when they're being asked to think about another resolution. They analyze it from the standpoint of I should know what this word means. So, as an example, a couple of years ago, we were arguing about the removal of Confederate war hero memorials, statues in honor of, say, for example, Robert E. Lee. Should they be removed? Well, a couple of advocates, of course, looked at the word remove and say, okay, we'll take it out of this. For us, it means let's take it out of this park and put it over here in this other public place. So for them, removal was not making inaccessible. It was just moving from its current position to a different. So, it makes for some interesting argumentation when you have students thinking, yeah. I'm sorry, I missed your comment.
Change of context, really.
Yeah, basically a change of geography, physical context, yeah.
Well, I'm going to switch tracks a little bit. You're known for bringing poetry into your classes. Can you talk a little bit about that? When and where do you bring poetry into your teaching?
Up to this point, and in all honesty, full disclosure, I do it some quarters, other quarters I don't do it. In some quarters, I particularly focus, when I'm particularly focusing on language, I'll bring poetry into the classroom there, because poets, of course, have this particularly rich facility with language, and so I'll try to do that. But for a number of years, I used it for all my public speaking classes and my introduction to communication classes as well. I haven't taught intro in probably 4 or 5 years now, so but it was particularly helpful there in sort of setting a tone for the class to kind of help students forget about what they were thinking when they came into the classroom, which is usually, here are all the things that I learned in my last class. So you have all that residue of, this is what was going on in my last class, or this is what's happened in the last 10 minutes between classes, and now I'm preoccupied with that. So I use the poetry as kind of a way to set a tone throughout the whole classroom. And some of it was, lighthearted poetry, and some of it was a little bit more thoughtful. The Billy Collins poem on Turning 10, where he talks about the first big birthday. We're in college, but a lot of students in my classes can look back to that point in their life and think, oh yeah, I remember, I remember that sort of, that approach to olderness, I suppose would be the word. So that's when I got in the habit of bringing poetry into the classroom. And I liked the mood that it set, and a lot of students expressed interest, appreciation. Some would want a copy of the poem that I read at the beginning of class. So yeah, it was a good sort of culture and community builder. So yeah.
What drew you to communications?
That was one of those discoveries I made in college. Actually pretty late in college, if I can be quite honest with you. I was a sophomore in college when a classmate of mine encouraged me to, audition for a play that she was directing. And I had never been involved in theater or drama. And but I trusted her and went ahead and auditioned and got a part and enjoyed that. So that performance aspect of it was sort of reinforced there. But then the following fall, so this would be the fall of my junior year, that same classmate encouraged me to join the competitive speech and debate team. And I participated in speech events, informative speaking, persuasive speaking, interpretive reading, hence the poetry, all of those types of events at intercollegiate tournaments. And I found out I was actually pretty okay at it. won a couple of awards, and then I think after my first tournament, my junior year, I changed my major immediately to communication studies with a minor in theater, and never looked back from there. Up to that point, I'd been a business major and not doing very well at it. To be quite honest, I'm not a very good business person.
Mm-hmm. What's been your greatest success in the classroom? What drew you to teaching?
Boy. I mean, realize you're looking at 35 years, right? Mm-hmm. 35 years of classroom experience. So I honestly don't know if I could put my finger on a single, gosh, I'm so proud of this moment. There have been so many students who have done well. Say, for example, in the early 2000s, I think this was around 2003, 2004, I had a particularly talented student who was competing for our speech and debate club that we had at the time. And I mean, she worked her tail off all year long, went to every tournament, never missed, practiced. But she was also, she also came with a really good toolkit. And as a community college student, you compete against students not only from other community colleges, but against students from four-year universities and colleges as well. And this particular student was awarded the top speaker for the year. I mean, it was a season-long award. She had won more points for her team than any other speaker on any other team in the Pacific Northwest at that time. So I was particularly proud of that moment because I got to see how her hard work and her dedication was really recognized and paid off for her in the end. So that was a pretty proud moment for me. I'm currently right now in an interesting mentor relationship with a former student who was an international student who, after he left my class, became a lawyer in Germany. He's not practicing yet. Apparently the pathway to lawyerhood in Germany is fairly long and complex, but he's passed the equivalent of his exams and is now in a situation where he's just sort of beginning his career. But he contacted me a couple of years ago with this very formal, German request. Would you be willing to serve as my mentor? And I'm thinking, well, you realize I don't even understand the world that you're revolving in, but that didn't seem to put him off. And so we've been carrying on a mentor relationship for a couple of years, and that's been I would say a proud moment for me because here's a student who is very adept, very skilled, but who acknowledges that the things I have to teach and my life experiences might be worthwhile in a dialogue or in a communication with him. So that's a pretty proud moment as well. Mm-hmm. There's probably too many to mention, but those are two that stand out in my mind. Yeah.
What have been some of the challenges that you faced as an educator?
Wow, making the adjustment from a private four-year college and university setting and the students there to teaching community college students. 29 years ago, when I started teaching community college students, I felt in many respects this is a different group of people, and I'm not used to them. I myself didn't attend community college. I attended a private four-year college. And then in my graduate work at Wake Forest, of course, that population was pretty privileged. And so everybody, it was pretty selective in its admission, and so everybody showed up with this, great set of skills to set them up for success. And coming here to the community college and meeting our students and the really wide array of preparation and skills, that was the biggest challenge. I really had to retool and begin thinking about what it means to be successful as an instructor. It's not necessarily, just teaching to the top tier and ignoring everybody else, because in a community college you do that, you maybe are teaching to 2 people in your class, and then there's 24 people who are not getting any of your attention, or who just aren't getting what you're trying to express to them. So I became pretty conscious pretty quickly of the variety of needs that were being expressed by students in my class, and started to develop some tools to help them.
What do you love about community college? You've been here for 29 years. So what keeps you coming back?
Just that, the variety, the challenge itself keeps me coming back. I love what I'm doing. I had a colleague a couple of years ago after I had gotten out of administration. So this would be 2016. I had a colleague ask me, what was administration like? And I had to be quite frank. Administration is a job, but teaching is a calling. And I feel much more, just from my standpoint, I feel much more at home and much more emotionally connected to the work that I'm doing, because I still get to work with students. And administration was just one step too far beyond that, and so it wasn't quite as satisfying for me. But the daily challenge of trying to work with students and trying to help them realize their own potential. Students come into public speaking and argumentation and advocacy really unsure of themselves. There's a pretty high degree of anxiety, and I make it pretty clear on the first couple of days, there are no dark corners in this classroom that you can retreat to and hide in, because I'm gonna draw you out from those and encourage you to speak up. So it's been a good career and worthwhile, very satisfying in that respect. Some students are going through some really difficult periods. I had in both my public speaking and in my argumentation and advocacy class, I've had students who were transgendered, but they're just beginning that process of discovery and transition. And my class was actually sort of their testing ground for how they wanted to express themselves. And so I think some of the things that were being shared in those classes were really, pretty meaningful and pretty powerful for those
what
students.
Privilege, isn't it? It just feels like such a privilege that they trust you.
Yes,
and they trust the environment that you've created. Yeah,
They feel that they are in a safe enough space where they can express themselves. Right. And of course, their speeches aren't necessarily about, what it means to transition, or what it means to live, your first 16, 18 years with gender dysphoria, but just sort of watching them, get their feet under them and helping them find that new identity that, or I guess uncover the identity that they've always known they've had. That's a really powerful testament to a person's love for teaching. Yeah. That is one of the things I love about teaching. It's such an honor. But how do you reach the students that have a different learning or communication style from you? How do
how do you cross that chasm between what's natural to you and the way you communicate and the way you teach to reach the students that they're learning is a little different? I mean, the way you describe, I was doing business, excuse me, the way you described that, I was in business, but it just wasn't the right fit, but then communication was, is it kind of a testimony to this idea that we all have different learning and communication styles? And how do you reach those that maybe are taking this class from you because it's a requirement, and that's not their major?
Right. There's a lot of undiscovered talents. I think that people have that they've never been given the opportunity to explore, and that becomes a part of the classroom atmosphere. I'm asking students to explore things that they haven't before. We do talk somewhat, though, about learning styles and how that might affect the way that you're filtering a lot of the information that I'm sharing with you. I try to make as many accommodations as I can for these different learning styles. So, or perhaps even a learning disability.
Mm-hmm.
So, a student who, a recent example, a student who had profound dyslexia. I tried to work with this student to help her understand you don't have to bring notes up to the lectern to speak from, because reading from notes is a difficulty for you. Let's figure out some different strategies so that you can feel prepared and fully rehearsed, but that doesn't put you in a position where you're having to read, which is a difficult thing for you to do while you're standing up in front of the audience. I mean, it seemed like the equivalent of standing by your desk in second grade and being asked to recite, and you're feeling not confident and not knowing how to do that. So, I do try to adapt to the different learning styles as much as I can, but that is so much about one, trying to identify, okay, who in the class is struggling and what are the signs there, and two, just communicating with them, being pretty upfront. I notice that you are struggling here, or I notice that you haven't handed in this assignment, and there might be a number of reasons for you're not doing that. Let's talk about that, and let's try to get you back on track as much as possible. That's not to suggest that I'm always successful. I mean, one of the things that I had to adjust to as a community college instructor is that some students just leave.
Mm-hmm.
No notice, no notification, no follow-up. I think the current term is ghosting. They have just ghosted the class. And as much as I try to reach out to them after they've left, some do, some don't come back. But I don't know that that's a breakdown in my adapting to learning styles. I think that's one of those situations that the student is not quite yet sure enough of themselves to be in that community, in spite of everything that I've tried to do to try to promote that. So, yeah.
I think in those situations, we just try to let them know we're here for them when they're ready to come back. Yeah.
Well, and see, and therein lies, I think, one of the profound virtues of community college. And I tell students that those students that, because it's been a rough quarter and they've been distracted by other life things going on outside around them, and they just haven't been able to do the work, I tell them it's okay. You're not a failure. And when you are in a better place, come back. I'll be happy to work with you. I'll be more than happy to work with you. Yeah. So.
How do you remain current in your field?
You're asking me at the end of 2 weeks of crash course in technology, and a couple of different things I do to try to stay current. One, it's a lot easier now because I'm a lot more focused now in my teaching load and in my curriculum, where I'm not quite so spread out. 20 years ago, I was teaching theater, trying to stay current in that field. I was coaching argumentation or competitive speech and debate, trying to stay current in that community, and then also teaching a raft of communication classes. So I was pretty scattered all over, and so it was difficult actually to do any deep scholarship there. I was doing pretty well just to keep my head above water, I felt like. But now that I'm a lot more focused, it becomes a little bit easier to do the work of keeping track of some of the scholarship that's happening in the communication studies area. I was going to say one association that I belong to, the Northwest Communication Association, NWCA. I have a membership with them. I wouldn't say it's it's not like a national organization, but it features the scholarship with some of my colleagues. And so I do enjoy that, but that's pretty much the only academic journal that I subscribe to. Right now, staying current means, I think for myself as an instructor, staying current means technology. And I'll have to tell you, it's been a stretch. But I allow myself to collaborate with people who I think know a lot more than I do. So a couple of years ago, well, this is 2006, 2007. Maybe you can help me with the dates, Ira. When did we do Blackboard? I mean, that was...
Yeah, that's probably around 2005.
Yeah. So I experimented with Blackboard. Total disaster. We experimented with the hybrid modality, and we just decided it wasn't working very well for our students. But then as Blackboard became Angel, and then Angel became didn't become Canvas, we just dropped Angel and picked up Canvas. I jumped back into that pool of learning management system, and I honestly believe it's done nothing but good things for my teaching. I think some colleagues feel like it's just going to automate everything, and it's just push a button and you're no longer engaged. I don't see that at all. I think our learning management system that we have right now gives students so many different opportunities of addressing specific needs that they have with their learning styles. So if you're not going to pick stuff up from a lecture, just because that's not how you process information, you have an opportunity to see the lecture again, or to go back to the PowerPoint slide deck and actually look at the notes or read a transcription. Yeah. I mean, there are just so many opportunities right now, given technology, that it's just been this ongoing discovery of, wow, here are all the different opportunities that are right there in front of us. So, yeah, I mean, right now, staying current is not necessarily staying current in rhetoric or public speaking or advocacy or those kinds of things. It's staying current with the means of delivery. Most of the things I teach, and probably this is different in your field, again, the technology is changing continually, but I feel like the fundamentals of public speaking, like the fundamentals of photography somewhat. I mean, those principles of composition don't really change that much. The principles of speechcraft, they've evolved somewhat, but most of the time, sorry about the noise. Do you want me to pause? Can you hear it?
No, it's fine. You're fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
the speechcraft is, I mean, as it's evolving to adapt itself to these emerging technologies. And so that for me has been, kind of the focus as well. What's going on in the world of people expressing themselves and sharing their ideas? Well, for me, TED Talks is one of the greatest inventions ever made, because it allows students to see and again re-see all of these very good some very good, some not so good, but to see all of these different speakers and to analyze them on a number of different levels. So yeah,
maybe develop an appreciation for the importance of ideas and the ability to articulate those ideas. Exactly.
Yeah. Which they're discovering about themselves. I have something worthwhile to say. Yeah.
Well, so this idea of changing modalities due to the current circumstances is really an opportunity to explore even deeper this idea of how do we communicate with one another and how much collaboration and cooperation is necessary in order to achieve shared goals.
Right.
And so I find myself going back as I heard you talk about the fact that, rhetoric hasn't changed, even though the format and the technology changes, leads me back to this idea of general education outcomes and the communication rubric. Can you talk about your involvement with the development of that rubric, or how general education outcomes play a role in the courses that you teach?
Well, the communication rubric, in terms of the development of that, I've been involved in conversations, I think, since 1996, when outcomes first started to gain some momentum on campuses, and it was largely as a response to accreditation expectations, and so we as a college had conversations about, okay, what are those abilities that we want students to be able to exhibit as a result of taking a series of classes on our campus. And it was good. I thought it was a good, fruitful conversation. I know for some faculty, the outcomes movement has felt more drudgery than anything else, perhaps because they've never allowed themselves to step back from the actual doing of the outcomes work to see the value of that liberal arts. I'll refer to it as a liberal arts perspective. In other words, the sort of rounding out of the whole person, rather than just fitting them in a specific skill set for a specific job, which they may or may not get, or may not want, or a job that may or may not exist in another 5 years. This whole idea of helping sort of shape a well-rounded, well-educated individual. So I like the outcomes movement for that. The communication rubric for it, the most recent communication rubric that we're using in the general education, I think speaks a lot to what I teach, because a lot of it in trying to shape the communication rubric so that it serves both art and English and communication studies, photography, perhaps.
Yeah, visual communication.
Visual communication, right.
Communication as opposed to oral communication, but yeah.
Right, yeah. So in that rubric, a lot of the emphasis in the general education area is about the ability to express. It's the person having an idea. How do we shape that idea given the different mediums and the different modalities for expressing that, and then sending it out there and taking responsibility for it as well. Understanding this particular message is going to have this particular effect on an audience member, and being ethically responsible for that. So, yeah. So I like that communication is a part of that, is a part of our shared goal as a college. I have to tell you, I'm pretty keen on information literacy too, though, as one of our general education outcomes, because that just becomes so important when people are expressing themselves. And again, this puts us in an interesting conversation given our current political climate. Who's responsible for creating factually consistent messages? Ultimately, that has to be with the messenger themselves. So we spend a fair amount of time in class talking about the value of information literacy and what that means for them as students. And again, they'll make mistakes. Some of them will be quoting some pretty suspicious sources in their speeches, and I'll have to sort of, step aside with them or email them or something like that and say, maybe check the validity of this source before you go quoting them too far and wide. But that's what the classroom is.
Two things from you. Let me see if this resonates with you. One, I'm hearing that during this period of change, because of changing paradigms or changing context of you're shifting from face-to-face modality to fully online for this quarter, that the general education outcome of communication is the constant while there's change and fluctuation happening. And so it's kind of this foundation work that shapes what you're doing and gives you the ability to be flexible, remain flexible, to be able to adapt and change as a human being as jobs come and go and technologies change. That's one thing I'm hearing from you. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. I think I would agree with that. Yeah.
And then the second thing I'm hearing is really the gen ed outcomes that the college has selected. We've narrowed it down to 6 that we have decided are the irreducible outcomes, what it means to be educated, that you don't really work exclusively within one general education outcome because they're all interrelated, because you are talking about communication, but you need to address information literacy. You talk about the current world situation, the scenario of the fact that we have this COVID-19 pandemic would necessitate some quantitative literacy to be able to communicate the importance of what's happening right now. You're going to require some quantitative literacy. There's going to need to be some critical thinking skills.
Exactly.
And then how do you hold attention is going to require some creativity as well. Mm-hmm. And so have I missed them? We've got creative thinking, critical thinking, information literacy, quantitative literacy, diversity. And I think we've talked somewhat about the importance and why we think community college is a special place because of its opportunity to work with diverse populations of students, diverse ideas, the idea of being able to civilly argue and have discursive formation of meaning would suggest that these gen ed outcomes are pretty important to the work that you're doing.
Right. I'm not in any way frustrated professionally, but sometimes I'm always interested in wanting to do general education assessment beyond the 2 gen ed outcomes that I've identified, that are connected to public speaking and argumentation and advocacy. And I keep it consistently communication and information literacy, knowing full well that I could just as easily pick creative thinking, critical thinking, maybe not quantitative analysis, but the diversity
But
and multiple
maybe now.
perspectives. Yeah.
Well, the nice thing is the current system at Spokane Falls Community College for conducting general education outcomes assessment happens at the individual instructor level.
Right.
And actually, the only reason there was a limitation of 2 initially was because it was this large external activity that wasn't happening in the class. It was
Right.
happening isolated outside of class. And so to mitigate the extra work that was happening, we elected to narrow it down to 2. But the reality is those 6 outcomes, I would suggest, are being more than 2 are being covered in any one class on the AA degree. And you have access to all of the rubrics to be able to assess those in your class now that we have this system that no longer pulls it out of the class, but actually keeps it there and actually empowers the instructor to be able to measure and assess their students.
Yeah. One thing that I'm going to start doing kind of as an experiment this quarter, and it's probably not a good quarter for experimentation, but I'm doing it anyway. I'm adding more of the gen ed outcomes to my rubrics for a variety of different small assignments in my classes, and some of that will address critical thinking, creative thinking. Some of it will address the diverse perspectives outcomes as well. So that's my hope, that I start generating a little bit of that kind of data in my class for my benefit, and to improve my own teaching. Where am I not doing enough in that area? I can't really, I would love to incorporate quantitative analysis into my into my classes as well. I don't think I'm tooled up enough for that, but maybe in a couple of years.
Well, I really appreciate your time, and I've just got a couple of things I wanted to ask more, and that is, since you brought up the fact that you have spent 35 years in the classroom, which is a powerful testimonial to the passion you have for teaching that keeps you coming back, what advice would you give to a new faculty member, a new adjunct, a new tenure track? What advice would you give?
A couple of things, actually. It's important for new faculty to stay current with changes in how education is conducted. The way I was taught is nothing like the way I teach. The tools that I have access to, none of my professors in college had access to. And so it's really important for me, as these new technologies became available. I'm a late adopter, but I'm not a non-adopter. So I'm willing to let those people who are comfortable in these newer environments sort of clear a path, experiment with some things, break some things, make some mistakes, and I can watch for a while. But there comes a time to get in the game, to update my skills, to keep my skills in those areas fresh and relevant. So I think my advice then to a new faculty member is to understand that the way they were taught when they were in college is not the way necessarily that they will always be teaching. And there comes a time when you just have to, confront, as I had to confront, my lack of skill in certain areas, and I have to address that. And that's on me. It's not on anybody else. It's on me. So that would be one piece of advice. I suppose the other piece of advice is, if it doesn't feel like a calling, maybe not do it. I think you have to have a passion for it, or you're not as you're not as effective in the classroom as you might otherwise be. And that's not to suggest that a person can't lose their love of teaching. You and I probably could both name very specific examples, either from our experiences as students or from our experience with colleagues, those people who have lost the love of teaching and who are now just going through the motions. My heart goes out to the students of those faculty members, because I don't think they're getting the best that they might otherwise. So, yeah.
I will tell you that one of my underlying goals with this podcast is to help foster a little more reconnection with what stirred us to go into this vocation to begin with. And,
right.
and yeah, I totally agree with you that it has to be a calling in order to sustain all the changes, all the challenges, and yet it's so rewarding.
Yeah. Yeah. But, one of the things I've seen, Ira, and I think your project is brilliant in the sense of trying to create that sense of togetherness and reconnection. We've all become so siloed in our disciplines and in our academic fields, and there aren't those places where people can come together in an informal setting and share ideas over a meal, right? The faculty club or the faculty whatever doesn't exist anymore. And so, and maybe that's a good thing that it doesn't exist, because it was pretty exclusive and pretty exclusionary, but we still need some place to gather. We need some place for coming together and for sharing ideas and chatting in an informal way. This is what I do, and here's why I do it, and here's why I love that I do it. What do you do? And what things do you use, and what can I learn from you? So I think there's a ton of opportunities with this project. I'm really excited to see how it starts to shape up, and I hope it's enormously successful for you, because it will only benefit all of us as well.
Well, I've noted that those silos have existed, and what's interesting to me about this is, in my work as a general education outcomes assessment coordinator, which really emphasizes flexibility, but in that work, I've had the opportunity to talk to faculty in every discipline, and they blow me away with their passion, with their intelligence, with their commitment. And yet I don't hear that being expressed in a manner that, we end up being overwhelmed or sitting in our little part of the world. And we don't recognize how absolutely interconnected we are, and how absolutely what a great job people are doing. And we are living through a period of time in mainstream media where I'd say higher ed's it's being questioned. It's being the idea of a well-educated, critical thinking, questioning, and information literacy is being questioned in our society right now. And I think that part of the challenge is to not just stay hunkered down and try to weather the storm, but rather to recognize just how we are doing important work. And I just, I'm blown away by my colleagues every day. And I find it so inspiring that I hoped that by creating this, that our colleagues would start realizing just how special they are, and what they're doing is really important.
Yeah. Yeah. We are doing good work. I'm very proud to be associated and attached to this faculty. I think we do some really tremendous work, and it's not always reflected in graduation rates. Not that that's a bad metric. I think there are so many other ways for us to feel good about what we're doing for specific individuals, and for, in some instances, large groups of people as well. So, yeah. Well,
I'm going to take a change of direction here.
Okay.
What's one thing that your colleagues and your students might not know about you that is interesting?
Students or colleagues might not know. I live in a town with 400 people in it and lived there for 30 years.
And that's a great story. I got to hear. I want everybody to hear about this. Where do you live, and how far of a commute is it?
Well, I live exactly 44 miles from campus, so door to door, 44 miles. That's my commute, but it's all on I-195 or 195. So I'm a little closer to Pullman than I am to Spokane, and that's my commute. I get to drive through the north part of the Palouse every day and drop into the Spokane sort of trough and
you're in a farm town, right?
I'm in a farm town. Yeah. I mean, if I moved my camera, I could show you the wheat fields inside. I'm on the edge of a farm town, but it's a small community. When we first moved here, we didn't lock our doors for probably the first 15, 16 years that we lived here. And it was explained to us when we moved that we shouldn't lock our doors. And the reason why you don't lock your doors is because somebody might want to leave something in your house while you're away.
I see my dog's tails just showing up here. Hi, Modoc. The advantages of stay at home and working from home as we get to our animals with us. So you live in a small farm town.
Small little farm town out on the
Not
Palouse.
a farmer.
No.
But
no. Anybody who's lived in this kind of community knows that unless you are a farmer, you're forever considered an outsider. So
that's what I was curious about. Yeah.
I've been here almost 30 years now. My dad was the mayor of this town, and still I'm probably looked at as one of those people that don't quite belong because I'm not really attached to any particular tract of land. So, but that's fine. It's a good, quiet community on most days, and I really enjoy it out here. So that's something that not a lot of people know about me. Some people might know a little bit about my theatrical background. My one opportunity, my brush with greatness, I'll call it, to act opposite Patty Duke in A Glass Menagerie, and I was excited to act in a production of The Glass Menagerie as I was to be able to act opposite Patty Duke. I thought that was just one of the greatest experiences I've ever had in theater, and then of course being able to produce a play that I wrote a couple of years ago. That was fun. So,
wow. Nice.
Yeah.
What was the play about?
Well, it's called Seeds of Change, and it's had three productions now, but the premiere production was with Interplayers, now defunct, sadly. Not because of my production.
No, Interplayers. I could go on about that place. I love it.
Yeah. But the play is about three sisters who are from a conservative religious background, and it's sort of how do I describe it? For one of them, it's sort of a coming of age story, and for the other two in the household, so it's three sisters. If I can refer to them as spinsters without creating offense, but three unmarried sisters who are living together from a conservative family, and one of them is sort of pushing the boundaries a little bit with that. But it's a comedy. Almost borderline farce in the second act. There's a couple of elements of that involved as well. So, and at the time that the play was conceived, Washington State hadn't legalized marijuana in any way, shape, or form. So it has some of those elements involved as well. So, yeah. but it's a fun play.
I'm so glad I asked this question. I'm so glad to hear about this, because I think you also just illustrated something I think so critical, is that you're still practicing the craft of communicating. You're actively engaged in doing artistic work, and I just applaud you for that. That's just phenomenal.
Thank you.
Yeah, I definitely hope to catch the next running of it. It sounds like so much fun. Last question, and most important question: is there anything I didn't ask that I should have?
Maybe a question of what would you be doing if you weren't doing this? That might give you some interesting insights from the people that you're planning on interviewing.
Great question.
For myself, I honestly don't know what I would be doing. Professionally, at least, if I weren't doing this. Of course, with a background in theater, I thought, well, maybe I should pursue the acting and directing. But you have to be in some pretty large metropolitan areas, and that's not what I would consider to be an easy life. It's a certainly creative life, but I don't think I have the emotional fortitude for all of the uncertainties that go along with that life. So I'm, quite frankly, I'm not sure what. Well, I was encouraged once I got into competitive speech and debate. I was encouraged to consider law. So. Who knows?
Nice.
I probably would have started leaning that direction for myself.
Or a playwright.
Or a playwright. I mean, it's always in the back of your head, and I'm in the middle of one play and started another play, so that's ongoing. Right now, I'm hoping to get those out. Did you want me to read for you?
Please. I would love that. That would be such a treat.
That would be great. This is Wild Geese by Mary Oliver. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese high in the clean blue air are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over announcing your place in the family of things.
Thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Thank you for joining us today on The Academic Hedgehog. For show notes and links to teaching and learning resources, go to www.theacademichedgehog.com.